Welcome, everyone, to Conversations with Thought Leaders. My name is Andrea Sampson, and I'm the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique and the Thought Leader Academy. And I have the pleasure of having Mike Lipkin with me today. Now, Mike is the president of Environics, a global communications and motivational company based in Toronto. He's a certified leadership circle profile coach and specializes in engaging leaders at all levels to scale excellence and create outcomes that matter. Mike is a multi-time author with 9 books under his belt, and he'll share groundbreaking insights on his most recent book. And we'll talk about this in a little bit around, which is based in neuroscience on You Belong Here, how to make people feel safe to be their best, to take bold risks, and to win. Mike likes to call himself the potentiator. And this is someone who creates breakthroughs by enabling others to perform at their best. In the last year alone, Mike has spoken to over 100,000 people in 9 countries and delivered over 1,000 programs. Now, that just tells me, Mike, you're a very busy person.
So first of all, Andrea, thank you so much for the invitation to be on the show with you. I love talking to really informed interviewers and thought leaders like you. One small just adjustment to the intro. I'm president of Environics Lipkin, which is a communications company, not Environics, which would be the holding research company. So just a tiny little qualification there. But yes, I am active rather than busy because, Andrea, when I hear someone tell me how busy they are, there's a part of me that doesn't want to be busy because busy means you're doing a lot of things, but you and I know a whole lot of folks who mistake progress for movement. So they're moving, but they're not going anywhere. I am active. I'm endeavoring to make a difference. I'm endeavoring to do good things. But I will tell you, Andrea, despite my packed schedule, I don't think of myself as busy because I'm doing intense bursts of activity, and then I'm giving myself time to reflect and replenish before the next one. And if I ever don't give myself enough time to resuscitate my mojo, as it were, I can feel my power and my vitality edging off. So yes, it's good to be active. My personal point of view, not so good to be busy.
Well, Mike, I feel really privileged that you found time to actually be able to be here with us today. And I agree with you so much, busy work versus, moving forward. And also, though, what you just touched on, the need for self-care, giving that downtime, so essential. And I think it's one of the things that in this world of virtual meetings and, the change in status of where we work and how we work, it's something people forget. So I think thank you for that reminder and, making sure that everyone out there is hearing that, if you're not taking time for yourself, it's time to do that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your newest book, You Belong Here. You and I have had a couple of conversations about this, and it's something that is really important because belonging is one of those things that I think a lot of times starts to feel like a soft skill. It gets caught up in the DEI conversation, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, we all have heard, well, it's not just about being included, it's about belonging. But I think belonging goes far beyond just inclusion or far beyond the diversity question. I'd love to hear from you. What is belonging, especially in the context of the workplace, and why is it important?
Yeah, such a great question. So our entire book is about how do you feel safe to take bold risks. So when you feel like you belong somewhere, you feel like you have license to do things that you can only do if you know other people have got your back. So what we're going to be talking about in this conversation is the different levels of belonging. And when you actually do feel like you belong, you feel like you're being embraced. You feel like you're being accepted for the totality of who you are. You feel like you can go out there and make mistakes and people will love you and support you and be in your corner even though you've made the mistakes, or especially because of the mistakes you've made. Because if you think about it, Andrea, when we make a mistake, that's when we truly need maximum support. And so if you feel like you belong, if you know people are going to provide you with that safety net, then you are willing to do things that you otherwise would not have done, because you know you're going to be taken care of when the immediate result may not be the one that you're looking for.
Absolutely, Mike. And just before I go on, I want to acknowledge all the people who are joining us here live today. Thank you for being here live. And this is a two-way conversation. We're lucky enough to have Mike here. And if you have some questions, make sure to drop them into the chat. We will make sure that we address them. Yes. So we'll be watching all the way through today's live stream. Mike, I want to come back to what you just said. If you feel you belong, you feel safe to take risks. Yes. And that's a really important point, right? Yes. When we are in a place of belonging, we can be risk takers, which means we can innovate, right? Because we can't innovate when we can't take risks, when there is no safety. So I think where you're getting at is the concept of psychological safety and the ability to see yourself within an organization, within a team, within a group, in a way that you know that that you matter. Now, we called this stream today the 5 levels of belonging. And I'd love it if you could unpack that, because I have a feeling psychological safety might be in there.
Yes, no, thank you for that, Andrea. So yes, we do talk about psychological safety, but in You Belong Here, we talk about a very specific kind of psychological safety, and that is not just the safety that makes you feel safe. This is the safety that encourages you to take bold, audacious risks. The metaphor that I draw, and I know there are a lot of people watching us or listening to us who've been to a Cirque du Soleil performance. And when we watch these extraordinary artistes and acrobats perform their aerial feats, underneath them is a safety net. Now, you don't need a safety net if you're not out in the stratosphere doing these extraordinary acts. The safety net is to give you the courage, to give you the reassurance that if you try something highly ambitious and it doesn't work, you're not going to die. Right? So belonging is this unconditional support for those people who go out there and predict the future by creating the future. So to come back to your specific question, there are 5 levels of belonging. And at the base level is almost anti-belonging. It's called hostility. We've all been in situations where we have not felt safe. Now, the extreme example is if you're walking down a dark alleyway in an unsavory neighborhood, you're not going to feel safe. You're going to feel like you're in a hostile situation. And in those instances, Andrea, you should feel scared. Don't deny that fear, because that fear is a survival skill. However, sometimes we can go into an environment which is not life-threatening, but the way we perceive it, the way we describe it to ourselves makes it life-threatening. And so we feel like we are at existential threat from the environment and the people around us. Now, one step beyond a hostile situation is where you feel discomfort. You feel like this is not going to hurt you, but you don't feel at ease. You feel as though there is a pitfall waiting for you. You feel as though there are hidden hitches or hidden traps that you're about to step into. You don't have that well-being. You don't have that peace of mind. You start to expect bad things to happen. And because what we expect is often what we see, and it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, uncomfortable situations actually lead sometimes to actions that are suboptimal, to say the least. Now, one step beyond hostile is where you just feel tolerated. So we've all been into situations where someone talks to us in a condescending fashion, or someone talks to us in a way that suggests that they are tolerating us, they're not embracing us. So I often talk to folks and they look at me as this South African who's come to Canada, who's highly animated, but also highly opinionated. And maybe they have to deal with me because their boss said they should deal with me, or a holding company suggested they meet with me. And as I'm talking to them, I'm getting a little bit of the eye roll. I'm getting a bit of the head shake. The responses to me suggest that they're having this conversation not because they want to, but because they have to. And so I don't feel good about me, and I don't feel good about them. And ultimately, the end result of that meeting is not going to be accretive to either party's well-being. Now, one step beyond tolerated is when you feel accepted. Now, accepted is when people have embraced you and you do feel a sense of simpatico, a sense of rapport with the folks around you. You sense that they celebrate who you are and you feel like you can be yourself to a point. Now, when you just feel accepted, there's a sneaking suspicion that people have accepted you because of who they think you are, but not who you really are. So that's why we put on this act, we put on this front, we curate our image, just like you and I are doing now, Andrea. And, you accept me, I accept you, but we still suspect that if they knew who we truly were, if they peeked behind the curtain, if they saw what we did when we are not hamming it up in front of the camera, or where we're not putting on our personas, they may not accept us anymore. And that then takes us to the highest level, where you feel like you belong to a culture. And this is a culture that will embrace you, that will support you, that will champion you, that will stand by you, even when you've revealed that you're not bulletproof, even when you reveal your humanity, even when you go through the missteps that are inevitable in every journey. And so when we consider the truly outstanding organizations, those are the organizations that have demonstrated in the crunch moments, in the crisis moments, in the crucible moments, that they embrace you and accept you and support you, despite or because of the missteps that you've had to go through along the way to breakthrough. So those are the 5 levels: hostility, discomfort, toleration, acceptance, and then ultimately belonging.
So it sounds like, so there's a couple of things as I listen to that. So the first is, the first 3, hostile, discomfort, and tolerated. These are probably workplaces that we would call hostile or toxic. Toxic workplaces, right? And I think many people who are listening may actually be in those places. Is there hope? Is it the workplace itself? Is it the team, or is it the individual? What do you do if that's where you find yourself? And I think, I remember when you and I were talking about this originally, and that the concept of being tolerated, I think we've all had that feeling. And it is a really horrible feeling. Like, when we're in a hostile or toxic or discomforting workplace, those are pretty obvious, but toleration is almost the passive aggressiveness. And so for me, that's kind of the worst, because there's the outwards kind of belief that you're accepted, but you're actually not. So what can somebody do if they're living in that lower part of that? Is it the only hope is to leave the job? Is it to look at themselves and go, what can I do? What can we do there?
Yeah, such a great question. And I agree, because if you're in the hostile or the uncomfortable situation, you are being activated. Yes, it might be what you would regard as a negative stimulus, but you can't cruise. If you feel like you're being tolerated, then there's almost like a cold war between you and the folks around you. There isn't that sense of simpatico, but it is something that you can endure. You don't look forward to it, but it's something that can almost numb you into a certain way of being. So to come back to that very important question, if you find yourself in what you regard to be a hostile or an uncomfortable situation, well, either you need to change your inner game, or you need to change the outer game. Let me explain. Oftentimes, people might interpret signals around them as being hostile, or might interpret their culture as one that is making them uncomfortable. Meanwhile, it's the way they're seeing the world, not the world itself. So if I have someone who challenges me, if I have someone who talks to me in a certain way that I might not be comfortable with, that person might be stretching me. That person might be talking to me in such a way that they think I can go to the next level. Let me give you an example. I have a client that I'm working with, and this is an individual who works for a large hospitality company. He's being groomed for the next level, but his boss is pushing him really hard. And his boss believes that this individual has come too far just based on his natural talent and charisma and knowledge of the industry. Now his boss is preparing him for the next level. That's actually a board appointment where he has to represent the organization to a range of different stakeholders. So my client has gone from feeling accepted, if not belonging, to feeling uncomfortable and sometimes in a downright hostile situation. After my call with him, he realizes that what his boss is doing is stretching him to the next level so that he's got the muscle to take on the new challenges, which are very different compared to the ones that he's had to deal with to this point. So as far as my client is concerned, simply by him reinterpreting the way his leadership is treating him has now shown him that he's not in a hostile situation. Yes, it might feel uncomfortable, but he's actually in a situation of belonging because the leadership is investing tremendous faith and resources in evolving him to that level. So on the one hand, Andrea, it's an inner game, the way you see things. On the other hand, and in our book, we talk about the FGA tonic that you need to drink every day. So FGA stands for forgiveness. So there might be some things you've been through in an environment which has prejudiced you or jaundiced you towards your environment. But if you were to let go of those and to forgive the people who might have subjected you to those, then you can look at your environment from a present standpoint, not from a past affliction standpoint. The G is the gratitude for what the environment has given you. So what amazes me, Andrea, as I do the work, and I'm sure you see the same, is how people focus on the slight they've just been through, the insult they think they've just been paid, or the difficult moment they've just been subjected to, and they get amnesia as to all the great things that have happened or the organization may have done for them to this point. So take stock of all the good things that have happened as a result of your experience, not the most recent challenging moment that you've been through. And then the A, and this is what I want to drive to, is agency. That we often underestimate the impact that we can have on the environment in which we operate. So like many Canadians, I do a lot of work with the banks. Why? Because that's where the money is. And if you with one of Canada's, big 5 banks, you're in an organization that has anywhere from 45 to 120,000 people working for it. And if you just think about yourself as one out of 120,000, you're going to think of yourself as puny. You're going to think of yourself as impotent, as not being able to influence or impact the greater organization. Whereas the truth, Andrea, is that every meeting with every colleague and every client is an opportunity to make an impact. So those folks who can, let's call it, surmount or get past those hostile situations or the uncomfortable situations into acceptance and belonging often act as though they're in a accepting or belonging environment. Now, if you do those things, if you do everything right, if you follow the vision and the mission and you really act in a way that you think is appropriate, and your leadership then treats you like you've just done the wrong thing or like you've acted counter to the culture or the principles of the organization, that's when you then need to ask yourself the question if you are in the right place. And there might be those moments where you need to choose another place. But I will say that we all have three options when we find ourselves in that moment. Number one, we change the team or we change the game, we leave. Number two, we change the way we act within the game. So if we did something in a certain way that didn't resonate, then we need to change the way we act. But then there's a third option that is open to us, and that is simply to change the way we've interpreted what has just happened by assuming good intent and really understanding the truth behind what has just happened. And when we understand the truth, when we've gone through the data, when we've done our due diligence, and we then reach the conclusion that we should go, well, then we should go, but without doing the hard work. Don't jump to those conclusions, because oftentimes, Andrea, when people go through the hostile or the uncomfortable moments, they've done the hard work. They've earned their spurs, as it were. They've navigated the environment. They've found out where the hidden traps are. That's when you now are ready to go to the next level. That's not when you should leave the organization. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I think just to kind of unpack it a little bit even more, what I'm hearing you say is that, in order to, regardless of where we are on the continuum of belonging, whether we're at the, the hostile or at the belonging level, the first thing we need to do, first of all, is check ourselves and our mindset.
Yes.
It's really important, because mindset is one of the things that is the biggest enabler for all of us in terms of how we see ourselves. When I'm working with speakers and thought leaders, we do a lot of work in terms of their mindset, in terms of how they're showing up in front of rooms, whether that be a professional stage or whether it be in front of a boardroom, in front of a, board of directors. And a lot of times what's happening is, we call it stage status. Now, it has nothing to do with socioeconomic status. What it has to do with how we see ourselves. And it's what you just described. So if we think of this belonging continuum from hostile to belonging, the first step is to ask ourselves, how do I see myself? What do I believe about me? Do I believe that I should be here? Do I believe that I should have this role? And we know the answer to that because that's intrinsic. That's a piece of it that's inside of us. And if we feel imposter syndrome, it'll come up with that question.
Yes.
But the next question that we need to ask ourselves, and it's the one that I think most people get a little tripped up on, because it's one that we believe we have no control over, and yet we do, which is what do I believe you believe about me? Now, this isn't what you actually believe about me. It's what do I believe that you think of me, or that you see that I'm capable of. And this is the piece that you were just saying, with your client, they're on a meeting with their boss, and their boss is pushing them. Now, if that client is looking at themselves saying, I know I've got the goods to deliver, but I don't think he thinks that I've got the goods to deliver. Now, what's happening is his boss or their boss is then going, I'm not sure that they've got the goods to deliver, because that's what you're telling them with your body language, with your responses, with your everything you're doing is telegraphing to the person on the other side of that communication that you think that they don't think that you can do it.
Yes.
And we actually have control of it. So when we ask ourselves, first of all, what do I believe about myself? And then secondly, what do I believe you think of me? And when we can have congruence between those two things. So if I believe that I'm up for the job, and then I show up in front of the room and I go, you believe I'm up for the job. You sitting in the audience or on the other side of a phone or wherever you are looking at going, wow, that person is really good. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from, there's two pieces in there that I want to sort of address with you. One is imposter syndrome, right? So a lot of us, especially as you move up in your career, it can be really easy to think, oh my gosh, I got here by accident. I was given an opportunity. I was lucky. And we know that that's not true, but it can feel that way. So imposter syndrome can get in our way. But the second piece on that is also about looking at how we're showing up and what is it that we're delivering so that people see the value. So it's both, right? Because when we see how we're showing up and we recognize that we do in fact have the goods to be at the front of that room, then it's okay. Now let's get judged by the thinking you're bringing, by the that's a whole different level, and it changes the way we show up. So looking at that, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome, and then I'd love it because we've only got a few minutes left. I'd love it if you could touch on what are the tips that people can take away from today that they can implement right away.
Yes. Well, look, thank you, Andrea. Frankly, I think from the very beginning of this conversation, folks have been taken away so-called tips that they can implement. But let's go straight to what you can implement. So I can guarantee you, no matter who you are, you're going to feel like you should be more, or you should be able to bring more, or somehow you're falling short. That is the hallmark of folks who are never satisfied. I will tell you, I have another client. He's actually based in Korea, and he's a second dan black belt karate practitioner, in addition to being a senior member of a large engineering company. And I asked him, I said, what does it take to be a second dan black belt? And he said, you got to be a white belt who never stops learning. So I can guarantee you that when he's playing at the level of black belt second dan, he wants to play at the level of 10th dan, and he's asking himself, can he get to the next dan? So the moral of the story here is love that feeling of needing to prove yourself. I will tell you, Andrea, I'm at the stage of my career where I've achieved a lot. I've received, more than my fair share of kudos. I've been rewarded with a lot of material rewards. But what has got me here is not what's going to get me there. So I have what I call delicious discomfort, that I know what I've got and I want more. So I want to go through it. And there's no question there are going to be moments where I feel like I could have brought more. And I will castigate myself. I will berate myself for just a few minutes after the event, and then I'll move on. Because as they say in baseball, the most important pitch is the next one. Now, you actually said something very important, which is how do we actually show up? And let me give folks an instant tip that just like right now, you and I are engaging each other through the magic of a webcam. We're using StreamYard as the channel here, but whether it's StreamYard, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Teams, whether it's WebEx, you are going to be talking to a group of folks who you may not always be able to see. In fact, that could be the norm. Yeah. You and I both spend a lot of time talking into a webcam where there might be 500, 1,000. I just did a talk with a company called World Financial Group. We had 25,000 people on the call from across North America, and all I could see was my interviewer. So right. What am I saying over here? That when you cannot see the audience, you must assume that you are crushing it. Don't ask yourself the question of whether you've got their attention. If you feel like you're getting lost sometimes during the course of a long presentation, go through that wobbly moment and then grab onto the next point and look forward, and always come across as someone who is in control, who is confident in the impact they're having on the folks to whom they are speaking. Andrea, I call this authentic acting. So right now, I really feel like I belong in this conversation with you. You've invited me, therefore I must belong, but also you're very skilled in asking me questions that enable me to bring out the best. And that's why you'll see underneath my name, it says the potentiator. And a potentiator is someone who brings out the best in others. So, Andrea, I feel like I belong in this conversation with you. But at the same time, because this is live, there's no script over here. There's some things I'm going to say that I'm going to be very proud of when I look at this interview afterwards. There are other things that I might not be so proud of, but that's okay. We're living in a world where imperfect now is much better than perfect maybe never. So here's my message to everyone on this call. And I'm sure that if people are watching us, they are in the business of presentations, they're in the business of selling, they're in the business of leading. You want to show up in a way where people are invigorated by your presence. So I want to give folks a very powerful tip here. And in You Belong Here, we have a milestone that we brand as Grow Enriching Relationships, because the more algorithms drive what we watch, the more AI influences us, the more digitized the world becomes, the more we crave human contact. And whether you're working with IBM or whether you're working with the government of Canada, you're working with one individual at a time. And what amazes me, Andrea, is how often just saying the right thing to the right person at the right time could lead to a multi-million-dollar sale. To give you some idea, I'm working with this hospitality group, and they represent a resort on the West Coast. And they were pitching a large pharmaceutical company who is going to bring 500 salespeople to this property in a deal worth $2 million. And the reason why this gig won the deal is they provided a bag of chips in the room of the key decision maker that were from the plant that makes chips from this person's hometown. And that wasn't a fluke. They did their due diligence, and someone said, look, just so you know, when Mary comes, make sure you've got these chips in her room, because she loves them, because they come from a plant that's a few kilometers from where she lives. And so this woman was so taken by their attention to detail that she gave them the deal. So all of this is to say that whether you feel like you belong, whether you feel like you're an imposter, whether you feel like you're going through a challenging time, when you show up, bring people joy, make sure that they want to have the next meeting with you, because frankly, every meeting is our entire life in miniature. And now more than ever, if someone gives you FaceTime, and even more important, Andrea, if they give you in-person time, you want to make that such a memorable event that if they can choose, they're going to choose you. So I hope I've given your folks just a series of impromptu tips right there.
Look, Mike, that was fantastic. And I think there's a couple of things I take away from it. And to add on to what you're saying, we live in real time, in real speed. So every conversation we're having is going to lead to another conversation, whether it's with that person or another person. And so when we stop getting so caught up on every word and every phrase and everything we're doing, and we recognize we're going to have another opportunity, and we're going to have another opportunity, and it may not be with that person, but it will be with another person. And the conversation we had last will help us for the conversation we have next. And so when we take the pressure off of ourselves to always be perfect and strive for the 80% rule and go, at 80%, we're still learning. At 80%, we're always getting better. And so therefore we continue to move forward. So that's my little tip. But I love your tip of always believe that you're crushing it. I think that is the most important thing that any of us can do, is that, you know what, every time there's a default, every time that we have a lack of information, we can't see the person who's across the screen, or we can't read the person who's across the table from us, assume you're crushing it. And you will, because that's what happens.
Well, there's a very important point I want to make as we close here, Andrea, and that is, think about the following question. How can I help you? It is one of the most common phrases we hear. However, depending on who's asking it, it can create different emotions within us. So if you're in a place you shouldn't be and a security guard comes up to you, he's going to go, how can I help you? That ain't going to be reassuring. If you with someone who's coming from a hostile or an uncomfortable place, they might say, how can I help you? And it's going to make you feel uncomfortable. However, if you ask yourself that question while you're talking to somebody else, you're going to bring out the best in them. So I will make a confession right now, Andrea. As you talking to me, the question I'm asking myself is, how can I help you? In other words, how can I help Andrea make this the best interview she can have at this moment that's going to maximize viewership and followership for Andrea and for me, but in a way where she feels as though, as a guest, I enabled her to perform at her best as the interviewer. So as the interviewee, I'm asking myself, how can I help you? And I know that if I'm truly tuned into that message, I'm going to crush it.
Amazing. Thank you, Mike. This has been an incredible, incredible conversation. And I hope that I feel how you're helping me, and I hope that in some way I'm helping you
Oh, yeah.
along the way. This has been a really, really fantastic conversation. So thank you for that.
Well, add, sorry to interrupt, but this is real time, Andrea. Look, I want everyone to know that Andrea is already helping me. You know, she's running a very successful business, very successful speakers bureau as one of her streams. She's found me work. So I'm talking to you not from a theoretical place of gratitude, but from a real place of gratitude, because you've been financially rewarding for me. Merci beaucoup.
Well, it's my pleasure, because you are easy to sell, Mike. Your work speaks for itself. How can our guests keep in touch with you?
Well, you can find me on the internet, mikelipkin.com. You can check me out on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Instagram at Mike Lipkin. You can follow me on Facebook. Most importantly, the way you can help me is to buy either the analog version of the book on Amazon.com or the ebook version on Kindle, or I read the book in a 7.5-hour read on audible.com. So please avail yourself of the book in any format, leave a review, and you will be doing me a huge service.
It's an amazing book. I recommend anyone pick it up. It is going to help you. So thank you, Mike. And thank you all for joining us here today. I'll be back in 2 weeks with my guest, Suzanne Gildart, and we will be talking about consciousness in robots. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. And for those of you who are in the Southern Ontario area, oh, I'm sorry, it's next week. I forgot. We moved it ahead a little bit because Suzanne's got some things she wants to share, and they couldn't wait for 2 weeks. And if you're in the Southern Ontario region, we are having a salon in Toronto on June 13th. That salon is all about choosing agency and power amidst change. We've got an amazing lineup. I'm actually one of the speakers, Laura Beauparlant, who'll be speaking about living a life worth dying for, and Karen Agro, who's going to be taking us through how music is actually sonic medicine. It's going to be fun and fascinating. If you've never been to a salon, make sure you get your ticket. It's kind of like Bridgerton meets TED. We've got a great event signed up. So check out the links below. We'll have all of the places where you can keep in touch with Mike. And I can't wait to see you in a week when we talk to Suzanne Gildart.